Hello and welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss coming to you from Disaster Zone, USA. I mean, Los Angeles. Thank you so much for listening. It is such a pleasure to be able to produce this podcast, and I really appreciate your attention and support, and I want to know how I can provide more value to you. If there are subjects you think I should look into, or if there are questions you think I should be attempting to answer, please let me know. You can email me at connect@organicwinepodcast.com. I would really appreciate any feedback at all. How can I make this podcast better? Let me know by emailing connect@organicwinepodcast.com. And thank you. This podcast is about the ecology of wine. But what does that mean? My definition of an ecological approach to wine is an approach that seeks to protect and enhance the quality of the greatest number of lives. And I'm definitely not just talking about human lives. Ecological choices are often presented as false dilemmas. Should I drive for 4 hours to buy organic grapes or use the conventional grapes next door to make wine? Should I drive my tractor 15 times through my vineyard, spraying unhealthy doses of copper sulfate in order to meet organic farming standards? Or instead, drive my tractor 4 times through my vineyard to spray conventional industrial chemicals like Captan and Mancozeb? What if the correct answer to these questions is none of the above? The false dilemma is the assumption that A, I must use land for wine production, and B, I must use grapes or other ingredients that require sprays. The ecological choice is realizing you don't have to do any of these. My guest for this episode makes wine from flowers. Her name is Aaliyah Nitoto, and her winery is called Range Flower Winery. She's based out of Oakland, California, so she could use grapes, but her first attempts at infiltrating the grape wine hegemony were not overly welcoming. As she assessed and regrouped, her studies led her to a different calling. Her story is inspiring, and her fermentations are both refreshingly novel and at the same time steeped in historical tradition. At every step, she has had to confront and overcome the grape supremacy of the dominant wine culture, and a few other obstacles as well, but she has created a beautiful and ecological approach to wine, and I'm grateful to share her story with you. Enjoy. Oh, yeah. Hey, welcome.
Thank
Aaliyah,
you.
thank you for doing this, Aaliyah. Could you introduce yourself and your winery?
Well, I'm Aaliyah Nitoto, and I'm from Free Range Flower Winery, and we make wine with flowers.
That is such a great introduction. Thank you. Are you, why do you call it Free Range Flower Winery?
Well, no, it was just kind of a joke. It's like we're in California. There used to be that whole campaign for milk, like the happy cows,
Oh, yeah.
that they're
Chicken eggs.
living out in the wild, having like happy and free, and
Uh-huh.
so it was just kind of a play on that free range flowers.
I love what you're doing. And I would love you to just talk about how you got into doing flowers. Like why flowers? Like you live in California, right? You're in the Oakland area, right?
Yes, I am, and
Lots of grapes around you.
yeah, it's well, the story as it's
Yes.
told is I started thinking about flowers, I suppose. I guess I need to start by I was being interviewed like last year. I was being interviewed last year, and I was asked what it was my first experience with flowers. And it was something that I hadn't ever thought about before. And just thinking about it, the thought that pops up in my mind as my first memory actually is me sitting in the grass at probably like 3 years old, sticking red clover in my mouth.
Mm.
There was tons of bees, and the bees were like in the clover and doing their little bee thing, eating clover, gathering pollen, doing whatever. And I was pretending to be a bee, and I was eating the clover flowers, and I was covered in bees, and the bees, it was one of those things. It's like, now that I'm older, I know that bees are docile when they're feeding a lot of times. And so I never got stung, and I always thought of them as like my friends.
Yeah.
So that was my first thing, and flashed to 10 years old and being at a party at my mom's house. And she had wine for everybody. And of course, I was too young for wine. And it fascinated me though. And I decided that I wanted to participate by making it since I couldn't drink it. And so I mixed Tabasco sauce and water and grapes, and nobody would drink it. So that's basically kind of the foundation of, for my spark of interest in wine, which I never lost because it's like I had my heart broken that I nobody would drink my first concoction of wine. And then in college, I actually saw an internship for wineries in Napa, and I thought this is so cool. As a biology major, I'd love to, learn how to make wine, and I'd really love to be in this lab. So I signed up for internships. I didn't get any of them, and
Was
I
that just
decided
because of your major, like you because you were in biology rather than viticulture and enology, or like
maybe, maybe.
maybe nobody knows at this point
Nobody
why?
knows. Nobody knows. All I know is I didn't. Like I went to Mills College. Mills College doesn't have a major in viniculture.
Right.
Looking back on it, I don't think that it would have mattered too much. The looking, I've learned tangentially about winemaking with grapes, while teaching myself how to make wine from flowers. And you need to know biology. You need to know about pH. You need to know about, you know, um, you know, OChem, organic chemistry, and things like that
Yeah.
on the general side. And it's I don't think that my background was any more or any less um, um robust than
Appropriate.
somebody
Yeah.
that studies viniculture. Actually, I know people who are studying viniculture now, and I talk to them about what they're studying, and I actually end up, helping them with their work because, I mean, it's the same thing. You're just like applying it to grapes. You
Right.
can have it in general, you can apply it to grapes. So it may have been that I had a biology major rather than a viniculture, or it may have been any other various thing. All I know is I didn't get one.
Gotcha.
And I went into medicine and herbalism because food and health and healing is also important to me. So I also studied food. I'm also a certified nutrition consultant, and it it's something that is really, when you're studying herbs, you basically find out a lot about them, about their characteristics, about different ways you can prepare them. And came across the fact that you could prepare flowers and other herbs as wine. And I
Right.
was like, that's crazy. And I decided to look and see if I could find anything out there in the world about that. And I couldn't at the time. I really couldn't. I was searching. I could find instances of infusing grape wine with flowers or other herbs or whatever, but I couldn't find anything specifically about wine made from flowers. I had, when I was a teenager, read Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
Um, you know that
Yeah.
book?
Yeah.
And and they actually pick the dandelions off the lawn, and I mean out of their in their yards, and make wine with it in the summer. And
Yeah.
I thought it was always a metaphor. I didn't know that it was. I didn't think about it as an actual practice.
Right.
So that all came together for me, and I decided I wanted to teach myself how to make this wine type, partially because of the fact that it was my passion, kind of connecting each other, and the other
Yeah.
part is that finding out that it's something that has historically been out in the world that most people don't know about,
Yeah. What
and
is
then
the
finding out that
history?
it's a tradition that women were mostly doing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, please, if you can dig into that, or tell what you've learned about the history of what you're participating in.
Oh my God, it's such a rich history, and it's so crazy. There's still so much to learn because women are were the primary makers of this type of wine. Women who are middle and lower income, and I sincerely believe that that's the reason why we haven't heard about it.
Hmm.
Historically, you don't see histories of middle and lower income women being told
Yeah.
anywhere or anything preserved maybe the things that are preserved are usually the things that they created.
Right.
For example, herbalism. They talk about, oh yeah, women would, make herbal remedies or whatever like that. Or they'll talk about, oh, in ancient times, people used, you know, flowers for this, that, or the other, or like these herbs. But they won't say, this
Mm.
particular woman, I think the best way to say it is, we know the first man who decided to use mercury as a cure for, the gout. No, even though it didn't work. even though,
Right,
even
right.
though that's really poisonous and problematic, we know who that person is. There are, if you look through history, if it's something that a man created,
Especially from the upper
specifically,
class, right?
yes,
Especially
but specifically if they were upper class, we know what they did, even if it was complete bonkers. We know what they did, but you don't see the history of women, and
Yeah.
especially the women who had little to no power.
Mm.
So, being a Mills woman and being a feminist, I'm like, wow, this is really crazy. And so, I decided to I decided to learn about it. And some of the things that I've learned is that alcoholic beverages in general are, history points to the makers of them being primarily women, from beer to sake.
Oh,
Actually, like historically,
because
they were
these were,
made
yeah,
by,
because this was all domestic tasks, right?
yes,
Essentially, like these were
yes,
tasks of preservation, keeping
yes.
the harvest through the winter. That's
Yeah, and
amazing.
yeah, and if you look at it, it's like, in Europe specifically, there was a time when sanitation, there were so much that they didn't know about sanitation that um they had to drink beer or wine instead of water because people like die from dysentery. So it was the women who were doing that, and they were doing it in their basements or their whatever other place that they used to store their their things for the winter.
Right.
That was one of the traditions.
The canning
And
shed, canning cellar, or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know
Root
if you
cellar.
know Atlas Obscura.
Oh, that sounds familiar, but I'm not familiar with it.
It's an online literary magazine that has a culinary arm called Gastro Obscura, and I was interviewed for this extensive article they did that talked about the history of women and alcohol, and
Okay.
it's really amazing. And so they have a lot more information on this than I do, but they
Okay.
talked about how women were, they were the beer makers, and they would like wear a pointy hat, and they would carry a broom into market. What they were If they were going into market with their beer, um, they usually made it in their home, and they'd put a broom outside the door of their home, above the door, so they can let people know that they had beer available. And they used a kettle or a
Yeah.
cauldron,
Sure. Yeah.
and it's
Part of
like,
beer making.
yeah, and I'm like, and it's kind of blowing my mind because all the archetypes in that are the archetypes for like a witch.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, that is really, and
Yeah.
some
Whereas
of
the
the
guys who
things,
did it were monks. you know.
yeah, yeah. And so it's just something that is really, it's kind of crazy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm like, that is really, it's another one of those things. They talk about how herbalists were treated, and as witches or midwives or the women who made beer.
Right.
They're women who were,
This is
um,
fascinating.
who had an expertise, who
Right.
were smart, and who had some personal power,
Right.
and money. They were able to have their own money,
Yep.
and they were not, and because of that, they were able to be autonomous.
Yep.
And looking back on the history of women and alcoholic beverages, I'm like, this is one of those reasons that I believe women were like burned at the stake.
Yeah. Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
seriously, I mentioned monks, but that's because we have come to associate brewing with monks, but that's because the monks didn't have wives. Like if they if they were normal guys, they would have been, their wives probably would have been doing the brewing for them, and then like the wives wouldn't be known because they were wives. You know what I mean? Like we know about monks because they're dudes who didn't have wives. If that makes sense, you know what I mean?
And
Like,
there's also a
th-
part of the history where the church was in control of not the beer necessarily, but wine making. If there were certain areas where it's like only the church could make and the nobility could make wine. So it
that's
was
really
kind of
interesting.
taken away
Yeah,
from the
right.
regular folks. So it's really fascinating. Also, finding out that sake is something that was also created by women. I was completely floored about that. And it's just like in North Africa, honey wine not only was invented by women, meat and honey wine, it's still controlled by the mothers and the grandmothers of the families. And they have their own recipes
Mm.
for their wines that are their family recipes that they keep,
Oh wow.
secret. So that, I'm like, these are things that, and it just kind of connects with me to a lot of what's happening in the world. I think about, the kind of backlash against feminism and the fact that the idea that women are not smart enough for X, Y, or Z, but women are graduating from colleges at larger amounts than men right now. Women are going into the workforce and a lot of times making more money than men right now. And the backlash, I think, is coming to try to, at one point it was like women were not allowed to learn how to read. Women were told that they should not be involved in politics because it was too complicated for them. Like all the things, women weren't allowed to vote, and we're having all this backlash again. And it's interesting how it can, like food and wine and things like that connect to it, and they're kind of like parallel stories.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting. And of course, like the things that I was saying, like are just speculation. I don't know anything about these histories. It would take some really interesting historical
Hmm.
stuff. But
Well,
I mean, just the ideas that you're bringing up are really, really fascinating
yeah,
to
and it's an
explore.
extrapolation. I've the amount of history that I've been able to find is so scarce that you have to extrapolate. When you
Yeah.
hear about, okay, in ancient Mesopotamia, the clay tablets say that there was a goddess that gave beer making to women, and that there is no instance in those writings, those Mesopotamian clay tablet writings, of men making this. It was always the pronouns are always female for the
Mm.
makers. So there's an extrapolation from that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's yeah, really
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Well, um, can you talk a little bit about what you use, what kind of ingredients you use, and why you choose what you do, and how you source your ingredients?
Well,
I mean, within obviously you probably want to keep some like sort of proprietary secrets and things like
of
that,
course.
but but whatever you can tell us. I mean, obviously I care about the farming that is behind your ingredients and stuff like that. So anything you
Mhm.
want to talk about?
Well, I don't have a farm. Um,
Right. So you are, but yeah, but why are you choosing? How are you choosing to source what you
Sure,
source?
sure. So, as an herbalist, I learn a lot about different flowers that have different healthful effects, and I basically look at that and decide what can have the most synergistic connection to a drink that we're drinking for pleasure. When I initially started making wine, with flowers, I was thinking of more a medicinal thing. And my first one was lavender because of its calmative and relaxing effects. It's lavender's used for anxiety and stuff like that. And I just wanted to make something that was really strong lavender, really low alcohol, that people can
Hmm.
take before going to bed, that'll help them settle in and sleep. And the issue with that was I had a lot of people who drank the whole bottle um, because they thought it was yummy. And I decided at that point that it was hard to it's going to be hard to keep selling that or prescribing that if people are drinking it, because I don't know how that's going to affect a human body to have that volume of lavender drank. I don't know if anybody's ever done that before, because it's a
Right.
concentrated liquid. So I kind of halted, and kind of rethought about it and decided to make a wine that people can enjoy. My first was lavender because it was such a hit and it was a really wonderful little drink. So, higher alcohol content, lower lavender content, with a nice balance to make sure it's well balanced, with a little citrus. And that's how I started. Outside of that, the other flowers I use are rose, marigold, hibiscus. Um, I just started a jasmine wine this year. I even
Beautiful.
have a rose hip wine because I saw, historically there have been wines with rose hips. That's so it's a traditional flower. And the reason why I chose those are they all have significance in herbalism, for nourishing, and but all can work very synergistically with the idea of relaxing and having a good time. Calendula is, that's marigold, is a flower
Mm.
that is used a lot for healing, and it's a really bright, exciting wine. So yeah, that kind of thing. But I think the main thing I look for when I'm looking for a flower first is to make sure it's edible. And then I look at the aromatics and things like that. A lot of times I'll take the flower and I'll brew teas with it at
Hmm.
different concentrations to taste them, to see what they taste like before fermentation. The really interesting thing actually is seeing how they change after fermentation. It's really
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah,
Um,
no doubt.
so that's basically how I do it. The other thing I do is actually look at the culture. There are things like geranium that are really popular right now, in cuisine, and so that's another reason I will look at different flowers, like the hibiscus. Hibiscus is a very culinary flower. It's used in everything from drinks to
Jamaica.
desserts and things like that. I've seen somebody who makes a hibiscus meringue pie.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Sounds
so it's like, there may be different reasons why I choose different flowers to make wine, but the start is, of course, that it's an edible flower, and then I have to play with it to see whether or not it's gonna work out.
Does anybody harvest citrus blossoms? Do you have you run across citrus blossoms at all?
I have not in volume. That's one of the problems. I There are flowers I would love, love, love to use that
Right.
it's hard to get a hold of.
Yeah.
Magnolia is a beautiful flower with a really
Yeah.
awesome smell, and it's edible. And it has been used in local cuisine more than kind of a broad idea of cuisine. But I've seen like magnolia cake, and I was like, ooh, I want to try that.
Yeah.
It's like, but it's to find magnolia that's clean, and even if it isn't organic, but like bordering on organic, so I could use it safely, is a
Yeah.
problem. Or I found jasmine recently, but what is some of the oh, dandelion.
Right. Finding.
Dandelion is a is a traditional wine that dates back hundreds of years back to Europe, and it was actually one of the first wines that were made in the United States, after the colonization of the United States, because it's easy to have dandelion seeds and grow them pretty easily. But finding clean, organic, fresh dandelion flowers, which is what you would need, is next to impossible, unless you have a farm and you can plant them yourself.
Right. Yep. as I understand it, you are sourcing all organic ingredients, right? And you try to even do better than that, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I try. I try. It's basically a clearinghouse right now that I'm getting my flowers out of. I don't have the time because it as my winery is so I actually have like the winery and a part-time job and work
Yeah.
7 days a week. I don't have time to go out to farms and look at flowers, things like that to see which ones I so I go to a clearinghouse that is out of Sacramento. They are able to make sure the flowers they get are certified and a fairly high quality. And I can also investigate through them whether or not they're fair trade,
Yeah.
which is also important to me.
Great. And you mentioned geranium. Kind of a good segue because into something else I wanted to ask you about because in many different sort of taste wheel or wine tasting type classes, if you ever do enology, geranium is one of these things that often is associated with flaws in a grape wine. Like it's for various reasons. Um, I love that it's a potential asset in flower wine, and it just kind of goes to show like some of the subjectivity of this when when you come from a different paradigm, whether you're within this grape obsessed wine culture versus a more expansive idea of what wine can be and embody. And I know you've had to deal with that just in sales and stuff like that, trying to sell your stuff. I'd love for you to sort of talk about what you've encountered in terms of, the sort of, I think the term that you used was grape supremacy. But yeah, anything related to that is really fascinating. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. Initially, one of the things like it's a little tiny backstory is I started the winery. I wasn't able to get a custom crush facility, which is a facility that'll help your wine if you don't have anything. And so I basically had to create my own facility, which I in West Oakland in a shipping container. I made it, was able to make it into a legal winery and made my way one of
Great.
there. And and making my wine out of there. I basically the only thing I could do is make it. I could sell it online. I could sell it other. I didn't have a tasting or anything. It's just a. So I had to actually go to stores, to retailers to try to sell my wine, to as a vendor into their shops. And there are so many wine shops that are like, oh, they're natural wine. I do research on them, and it says that they will take on funky mom and pop, like out there different wines, and that they're willing to, that they support small, independent, innovative winemaking. And I'm like, that's me. And I would go there, and to every single one that I've ever went to, it's like, we can't take you on. We only take wine with grapes.
That's
Yeah,
so
and then
interesting.
there's a couple that yeah, it's kind of, even to this day, the frustration is really there, because it's really hard when the gatekeepers for getting to the marketplace are people who are closed-minded, um,
Right.
and some of them wouldn't even try it or taste it or whatever, and it's like, um,
Really?
yeah, yeah,
So people
yeah.
were just like, no, I'm not interested. like, like,
Yeah, yeah, or
what are
someone
you in the
just like,
business for if you it's just the strangest thing to me.
well, I
Uh
mean, they have very specific idea of what wine is supposed to be. Like, when I was starting my business, when I was creating my business plan for this, I actually had people say, "I don't. Nobody's going to want to drink that.
huh.
That's crazy." And that's where I mainly got a lot of the pushback of, "That's not wine. That's something else. You need to call it something else." Yeah, and I have to say and give a shout out. Is it okay to give a shout out to a specific store
Yeah,
that took me
sure.
on? Piedmont Grocery.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
Piedmont, and also Total Wine, believe it or not. um,
Oh, fantastic.
um, uh, who took on my wine. I walked in it there and like just kind of out of the blue and was like, "Hey, I have this wine here. I, would love to have it." And the head person of the wine department was saying no, but his assistant, or the assistant manager for that department, was saying, "Are you crazy? I think that's a great idea. I could sell the crap out of that." And they basically did a thing where he's like, I'll bet you I can sell this wine." And he's like, "Yeah." So like took it on, and that was, oh my God, 7 years ago. They still carry it. They still carry it, and they
That's
also
great.
carry my other varietals. So, but it was really hard. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the narrowness of thinking behind that when you're in this business. I mean, I guess, like if you have like some small store and you have to like limit your choices to a certain amount of thing, but I still don't get it, honestly. Like, it is
yeah.
such a strange,
I mean, it's a. I understand. It's like being a small venue. You only have so much space. You want to make sure you have the things in your space that are going to sell. But then again, why would you advertise yourself as something that was off the beaten path, and you support
yeah,
makers that are not in the market that need a leg up if that's not
yeah,
exactly what you're trying to do?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's not. You can't, it's a complete, it's a marketing thing, but it isn't a truth.
huh,
But that's so that was a part of it. And and also the piece where I wasn't able to get a custom crush, which startup winemakers a lot of times get in
right,
order to sell their wine, to get their wine made. I had to actually make my own basic create my own space to make
yeah,
wine in order to make it, because I would not have been able to make my product, and then I couldn't get into stores. And now I'm still having, although I have a larger reach, and I'm in a couple of retailers, I'm still having some trouble. It's uh it's much better now. It's like I was saying, Total Wine has been really amazing to take on my wine. You walk in there, you can buy my wine there now. But they've taken on my wine without having a distributor. I'm too small to have a distributor.
right,
And because I can't have a distributor, and most places only take wine that are sold through a distributor. So
yeah,
there's a whole nother market that I'm cut out of.
yeah,
Just there are so many things. There are so
yeah,
many things, and then the another big piece when it comes to grape supremacy is the whole idea of awards,
right. Oh,
and
yeah,
getting
yeah,
medals for your wine.
yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I just got bronze medals for my sparkling rose hibiscus and my sparkling red clover.
From where?
From the San Francisco Chronicle
Oh,
wine
gotcha.
competition for
Right.
2025.
Gotcha.
So
Great.
I'm really excited about that. I've gotten some medals, but I have this like, I'm like, what do I do to get gold? It's like, or there's it's really subjective,
Yeah. Yeah.
considering there isn't anybody else on the market like my wine. And
Right.
the wine that they're comparing it to is wine from grapes,
Right. Yeah.
basically. So I'm at a disadvantage, and the one of the main things, a lot of wineries will send wine to a reviewer to get points, and no one will take my
Reviews.
wine on to
Yeah.
give it points, huh?
That is true. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's not. They're like, well, I wouldn't know what to compare your wine to, so we don't do that. And I understand that to a certain extent, but the way things are set up, my wine can't. There's doesn't have access to a certain echelon. I'll just say that. Only thing I can
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
of.
No, these are all things that people like don't realize until you step off the approved and official, definition for what wine can be, which everybody thinks isn't, is, nobody thinks about until you want to do something differently. It's like so many things when there's a dominant culture, it's so
Yeah,
uh
and
it's so
it's set up
invisible
that
until you
way.
try to not participate in it, and then you realize it's like enforced actually.
Yeah, and it's really set up that way. I'm not allowed to call my wine, my rose hibiscus or rose petal wine, I'm not allowed to call them red
Right.
wine
Right.
because they're not made with grapes, even though they're red,
Right.
because that is a term that can only be used for grape wine. I'm not allowed to call my wine white wine
Yep.
that are white
Yep.
because they're not, made with grapes.
Yep.
So it's like there is a lot of terminology that I can't use because the lobby for wines made with grapes have locked down those terms. So I
Yep.
guess somebody that makes a plum wine that's red can't call it a red wine,
Right.
even
Yeah.
though that's the color of
Yeah,
the
no,
wine.
that's the thing. It's like grape supremacy. That's like a real thing that you that term is no joke. It's not like it's not hyperbole. It is like a real it's a real reality to both the laws and the prejudices and the practices of the entire industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, you don't realize it until you do something like you're doing, and then you're like, yeah,
Yeah. Another really, really difficult thing for me, being a really tiny maker with very limited access, no distribution, and all of these things, is I thought that's okay. I'll be able to go to farmers markets and sell my wine at farmers markets, but I'm not allowed to do that because I don't have farm.
right,
I'm a really
right,
super tiny winery,
right,
and I don't have the means to buy land to grow flowers to have. And but if you go to the farmers market, the California Food and Ag has a rule that you have to grow,
yeah,
your material for your wine in order to be able to have it sold in the farmers market. And the
correct,
irony is that most of like practically all of that I see wineries that make wine with with grapes, they have distributors and they don't do anything at farmers markets. It's too small a volume for them to even consider.
right,
So they're not there. So and when I talk to Food and Ag, they're like, "Well, we're in the farmers," and I'm like, "I'm too tiny to do anything to any farmer, and the farmers aren't in the farmers markets anyway." And the other irony is that you can make jam, and you don't have to grow your berries or whatever. You can make, shoot, you can set up a beer truck at a farmer's market and not have to grow your grain, or a whiskey truck or whatever. You can do practically everything except for winemaking and I think olive oil. Those are you can make bread and not have to grow your grain.
right,
I mean,
right, right,
like all of these things. And I'm like, there's usually sections in farmers markets that are for farmers and then place that, well, these people aren't farmers, but they're makers. And I'm
right,
like, well, why can't I be in that section? And they're like, no,
right.
not at all. You're not
It is
allowed.
that is a strange one. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, because for a minute there, I was like, yeah, I mean, that one I get because I've looked into that as well for us, and for I made wine. I make wine, and it ran into the same thing. And then I was like, oh, but I get it. Like you want farm, but then you're right. There's the whole prepared foods section and bakeries who come with like croissants that are like, did you grow the
Yeah,
eggs that went into your croissants? You know what I mean? Like, did you like raise the
exactly.
chickens? Did
And
you
it's
raise
not
that
even,
grain and mill it?
yeah,
Yeah.
and I would feel less like upset about it because it makes me a little, it kind of gets my peak up a little bit if there were wineries at the farmers market.
Right.
There
Right.
are
But there's
not any wineries at the farmers markets.
right.
So they're keeping wineries out of the farmers market, say, that want to be there, that have, I'm too, the wineries that have farms that can grow their own grapes are able to get into, have distribution so they can be in the stores that I'm not allowed to be in because I can't have distribution.
Right.
And I'm not allowed to be at the farmers market because I don't have a, so it's, the whole market is locked down for them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, I hear your frustration. And
Yeah.
I've felt it as well.
Yeah, I'm actually like I haven't had the bandwidth, but I actually want to look into changing that law because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help anybody. It
Right.
doesn't protect anybody.
Right.
And I could say if they want to protect like big, like small farms from big ag that like buy, excuse me, like big wine that buy grapes from everywhere and make large volumes of wine, then they should have a tiered system that if you
Right.
make under X amount of gallons of wine per year, that you're allowed to sell at the farmers market. And then if you're, bigger than that, you have to have a farm or whatever,
Right.
and you have to grow your material instead of having this across the board thing where it basically freezes out like all of the and there are quite a few farmers. There are quite a few winemakers that don't have any property.
Right. That is very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what do you use for your base for your wines? I mean, are you making like a sugar water concoction, like
Well, I
solution,
can't
or
tell you the entire
okay,
thing that I use my base make for my base, but everything is organic,
okay,
and I do use water,
okay,
but I have an RO system, a reverse osmosis.
yep,
So we have a very high quality purified water that goes into our winemaking process, so we don't have any like fluoride or chlorine or anything like that that may be in our water source going.
well, can you talk about some of the advantages ecologically, for example, to working with flowers versus grapes, especially in California in your region?
Oh my God, there's so much. It's like I use so little water. I actually did I don't have the numbers here off the top of my head or and I'd have to dig for them because I have them written somewhere. That in order there's so many tons of water that go into or gallons like I almost want to look it up. But there's like thousands of gallons of water that go into making one barrel of wine with grapes.
Yeah, it's something like between 4 and 7 bottles of water go into every bottle of wine, or something like that. Those are some of the statistics I've heard.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not sure about it at that level, but it's pretty high. It's really
Yeah,
super high. And there's the liquid that's in the bottle, and then there's the growing,
right.
the
The
taking
farming.
care of the grapes over the time.
Yeah,
But like for example, marigold or lavender, first of all, you just have to wait till the plant goes into flower, which grapes take longer because you actually have a fruit after that. And all of the flowers that I use are drought resistant, or even if they're not drought resistant, they bloom much quicker. And so they have a
right.
much less water usage than grapes, like exponentially less. Um,
Yeah. I have a
yeah,
lavender plant in my backyard that I planted out of like a 4-inch pot, and it's now, taller than me, and I have to hack it back with a machete a couple times a year, and I never water it. And that's so that's one
exactly.
one
So
example.
if you wanted to make wine out of the flowers that you had there, pretty much the only water you'd be using is the water that goes into the bottle.
Right. Exactly.
It's nothing to feed the plant. And
Right.
marigolds are almost they're drought resistant. They're almost the same. You do have to water roses, but nowhere near the amount of water usage. It's so much less water
Yeah,
than
roses are,
you yeah.
yeah.
So, I actually think that it can be the next generation of wine when it becomes nearly impossible to grow grapes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, it seems like the other advantage is, if I understand it, you're using dried flowers. I mean, when that means you could, I mean, in California, you could have multiple harvests of different varieties of flowers that are blooming at different times of year. You could spread your winemaking out over the course of the year. And if you're drying flowers, I mean, even if you're using fresh flowers, you could sort of dry it. You could basically spread
Yes.
your winemaking process and everything out throughout the year. But if you're drying it, it's kind of like you could make a batch of wine almost anytime you want to, and sort of let it fit into your schedule or fit into a cycle that is a little more um, balanced, perhaps, than say like what a winemaking schedule would be, which is like, all everything at harvest you're working, nonstop, to bring
Yeah.
in the grapes and to do all the work that's involved in winemaking, all within a 2 month period
Hmm.
of the year, and the rest of the year can be whatever. I mean, lots of hard work, but a little less, a little more
Yeah, instead of
sleepy.
having a season, you'd have you can make wine all year round. Yeah, I do use dried flowers, and that's really good for that. And the flowers that I do that are fresh, that are seasonal, yeah, because one of the other things that I really love about this is that when I make a wine like marigold, it's a specific kind of flower. It's a specific kind of plant that's completely and utterly different from a rose
Right.
plant, a rose bush, or m- jasmine or lavender. They're all so different from each other, and
Yeah.
they have different growing seasons and different characters and qualities to how they react to the winemaking process. I made jasmine wine for the first time in the fall this year,
Yeah.
and it's this really beautiful pale yellow, and it almost looks like creamy because of the particulates in it.
Mm.
Even though I filtered it twice,
Well,
it didn't come out like clear. It came out this this it has this opacity to it,
like almost
and I'm
like a
like, and
Nigori sake kind of thing, like
yeah,
Nigori sake kind of
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
kind of like that, but lighter than that. It's
Right.
not as
Right.
thick as that. And those particulates, I'm like, okay, they will settle out over time, but they're less than microscopic. They're really tiny,
Yeah.
and so it would take years, maybe, like it would take a lot of time for them to settle out of the wine. And it's just really interesting. So you can grab a bottle and pull it out, and it has this slightly smoky look to it. And
Mm.
that's the first time I've ever come across that.
That's really
And
cool.
you know, yeah, and flavor wise and everything, it's really light with a really delicate floral. It's just really it's amazing um, to see the differences in the flowers, in the material that I use, from one to
Yeah.
the other. Another really interesting thing is like marigold. A lot of times, people who are out there who do gardening and use marigolds in their garden, they know that if you plant marigold, it can keep things away from your plants like aphids and things like that.
Right.
So the marigold that I use, um, at one point I was in like last year, like in the recent history of the winery, I moved into a winery that makes wine with grapes for a couple of years. Getting to the legit side, I'm like finally getting some help. I'm really happy I found a place to move from, though, because the wine made from grapes, since it's out in the fields, it's detrimental to my winemaking process, because my winemaking process uses basically everything is almost sterile. So if you're bringing stuff in from the fields, it just kind of inoculates my wine with whatever's in the fields. So oh gosh, I just went on a tangent. What was I saying? Oh, that's what I was saying. So in that space, I had four different kinds of wine going. All
Uh-huh.
of them got were contaminated with, I think it was Brett, which is
Oh.
a,
Yeah.
a, a yeast that is not great and not yummy. I
Right.
except the
Not
marigold.
flowery, that's for sure.
Absolutely not. Except for the marigold, I had to dump like 1,500 gallons of wine.
Oof.
Yeah, it was really bad. And the only one that survived was the marigold. And it has to be some quality in the marigold that makes it less hospitable for Brett. or whatever else
Oh,
might
interesting.
want to grow in there. So it's just really interesting. And over time, as I'm able to get more lab work for what's going on in the wine, maybe I can figure out what those things are in the wine that makes it special and that makes each wine special, because they're completely different plants. I have completely different aromatics, completely different just it's just qualities and structure. It's just really interesting, and it's always exciting to do a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah. So the the other wine that I make that is that actually feijoa, and it is a flower that's from Brazil, and it grows around the Bay Area because people love it. It's a beautiful flower,
Mm.
and they have it in their gardens, and it's really delicious to just eat.
Mm.
And when I make that wine fresh, like out of the fresh flowers, and yeah, so that one is seasonal, but the
Okay.
other ones, right now I can do any time of.
And do you have any that you suggest to use as mixers? Are you doing low alcohol variety? Like, what's your range look like as far as all that goes? I mean,
Well, the one that is that well, there's a couple that are really good. Lavender, of course. Lavender has notes of juniper, anise, um, and like a little lemon, and it's ginger.
wow.
It's a really herbaceous wine, really spectacular, a really like distinct floral nose, and we've had fun. And and some drink makers that I know have had fun doing things like adding it to cocktails that use a sparkling wine and replacing it for the sparkling wine.
Gotcha.
That's something that has been a fun thing to do. The other wine that people use a lot is like the rose hibiscus. It's a really lovely smoky flavor that can be used as a mixer. Um,
Mm.
I, I I think that it's really great to try. You can try something like that with any of my wines because of their unique qualities. I'm not a winemaker who's a purist. Some people will apologize. They're like, I made this cocktail with your wine. I'm so sorry because I know that you're not supposed to make mixers with wine. And I'm like, I that's another thing with the kind of the grape supremacy thing. It's like you
Right, right.
it's you purchased it, it's yours. You can do what you want with it. If you're having a wonderful time with it and enjoying it, then that's what you should do. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Well, great. I mean, can you sort of mention, I mean, anything else? Like, have I forgotten anything? Or, I mean, if you want to mention your website or any other ways that you think people should connect with you.
Oh my God! Of course you can get a reservation at the tasting room
Okay.
through the website. You can buy wine through the website. You can come out and see us. You can, of course, there's Total Wine or Piedmont Grocery. If you or if you like music, this Saturday we're having a wonderful band called Moving Van Band. We're having Valentine's Day roses handed out, and we're also getting a little a flight of wine with bites of like various treats for to go with them, and something that's because I always have some beard going on. I'm in a contest right now, Entrepreneur of Impact, and anybody could like come and vote for me to become the entrepreneur of impact, and like to get a mentorship with Damon Johns, who's the one of the sharks from Shark Tank, the one who had Fubu, the Fubu brand.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll be great I'm really kind of focused on that part. There's other parts, like there's a cash prize and pictures, having my picture in Forbes magazine. But I really am interested in talking to Damon Johns because what he did was he created the brand Fubu, the urban streetwear. He basically created a whole genre of couture by introducing urban streetwear to the marketplace. And
Right.
I think that he could be really helpful for me because what I've been trying to do is bring these wines, which are, even though they're ancient, they're new to the marketplace, even still, and like how to actually do that. So that's something that I'm really excited about. And the best place to, if you want to vote, is if you're on Facebook or Instagram, go to Free Range Flower Winery, hashtag Free Range Flower Winery, and you'll see the link and you can vote there.
Amazing. And freerangeflowerwinery.com is your website.
Yes, really
Awesome.
simple.
All right. Well, Leah, thank you so much. It's been really cool learning about what you're doing. And like I said off before we started recording, I'm just shocked I didn't hear about you and get to talk to you sooner. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. This is, it's always, there's always so much to say. I feel like I have to throw everything in but the kitchen sink because it, like, so much.
It's great. Thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I want to thank all of you who support this podcast through donations, Patreon subscriptions, sponsorships, or just posting a great review and telling a friend. You make this podcast possible, and I'm honored and humbled and inspired by your support. If you'd like to support this podcast, you'll find links to all the ways you can support it in the show notes.